You may remember from last time that I drew a little diagram to depict the basics of light logic. And what did that include? Importantly, it includes the idea that you've identified a primary light source. Where is the light coming from? This is really important with light and dark. As we draw with light and dark, you're going to find that real simplification and clarity becomes more important than absolute accuracy of observation. So when you're drawing with light and dark, you should always be able to answer that question, where is the light coming from? This is even if you're inventing it, but certainly if you're drawing, as we are, from direct observation. So I drew a sphere last time, I guess I do it again. And what we're trying to do is, I'll be very quick about this, and please go back and look at the earlier video, part 2 of the cross contour video, for a little bit more patient version of this. You're looking at the highlights, the areas where light is most directly hitting the forms. In this case, in our little imaginary sphere, it's hitting this side of the sphere, it's hitting the tabletop, maybe even all the way back over here, because this part is not, the sphere is not blocking this part. It's where the light is blocked, is where shadows start to appear. So we've got these shadows showing up on the side and back of the sphere. The main darkest part of that would be called the core, or sometimes the crest shadow. And then we have, importantly, the cast shadow. In other words, the object has blocked the light from another surface, in our imaginary case here, a tabletop, and it creates this cast shadow. It's very important to realize that shadow shapes are shapes just the same as the physical forms are shapes, just the same as the negative shapes are shapes. So you can take a cast shadow and you can think, how tall is it compared to how wide? How tall is it compared to the next shape over? Let's say the shape between the top of the cast shadow and the back of the table, right? So again, look again at the second video on cross contour for a slightly more extensive version of this same diagram and this same little talk. We may talk about more things. You notice I have a sort of lighter, so that the core shadow is kind of here, but then it lightens up as it gets close to the edge of the form. That has to do with reflected light, surfaces bounce light. So there are other things that we can do that have nuances, and we may talk about those later. But this is the basic. You need to have a primary source. Where's the light coming from? Where are the highlights? Identify the highlight shapes. Where are the shadows? Identify the shadow shapes, both the shadows on the forms and the shadows that are cast onto other forms, because the primary object has blocked the light. Okay, so now we're going to go from drawing with line to drawing full on with tone. When I talk about value in this class, I'm not talking about how much money art sells for. I'm talking about this range of tones. This is a value scale from white of the paper, to black, in this case, the black of my laser printer toner, but the black of your charcoal, the black of your ink, whatever material you're using is. And this is a series of steps, right? White, light gray, a little bit darker, darker still, middle gray, and then we get into all the way down to fully black. You could also present this as a gradient, as an even gradient. So really, there are more grays in the world than this, right? There's sort of infinite number of grays between just this white and this first gray. There could be one that's half step between here and there. So you understand the range of values. Now, what we're going to do today is a really super simplified approach that I think you might find surprisingly effective, and it help you to understand why simplification is so important when you're drawing with light and dark. Here's another found on the internet value scale, and this one has it labeled light, the light tones, middle tones, midtones, dark tones. The drawing we're going to do is going to only include 3 tones. We're going to start with a middle tone. We're going to tone the entire piece of paper a middle gray somewhere in here. Then we're going to decide anything that is lighter than a certain point, we're going to call it light, right? So this tone and this tone we would call the same thing. They're going to be the light tones, and you're going to erase it out. Likewise, you're going to make a decision, what do we call dark? At what point does it stop being middle and start being dark? And then anything that's that dark or darker in your whole view, you're going to just blacken it in. So we're going to make a drawing with just 3 tones. You're going to need compressed charcoal. You're going to need a hard eraser. It doesn't have to be this brand, but a plastic eraser of some kind. And you might want a rubbing stump optionally for this. And you're going to want your chamois if you have one. And I've got a dirty one here that I'm going to use. If you don't have a chamois, then a paper towel or a rag that you don't mind getting dirty will also do. The chamois should smooth things a little more evenly. Although on this piece of paper I'm using, which is not the paper I'm recommending to you, it won't smooth as evenly as it might on your drawing paper. You definitely want to be using your better drawing paper for this drawing. This is going to be a bit of a mess, so you might want to cover the area you're going to draw. You might want to anticipate that. I think this drawing is actually going to look really good if you're able to do the full 18 by 24 inch size, but I'm forgiving under our current circumstances, so if you feel you need to work at a smaller scale, and that's what's going to make it work for you, that's fine. So we're going to start with something called an imprimatura, which I hope I'm spelling correctly. It's an Italian term from the Renaissance. It's a painting term, really. And what it is a way that artists will prepare their canvas with a sort of light coat of typically a kind of brownish middle tone that goes over every part of the canvas before they begin depicting, figures or whatever it is that they're painting. And the reason for this is twofold. One is that it creates a kind of unified color that informs every part of the drawing, creates a kind of unity in the drawing. But the other is that it allows the artist to not only make a darker mark on a lighter page, but to make a lighter mark. So what we're going to do is take this charcoal and kind of smear it around the paper. And our target here is a middle tone, right? You want it to be dark enough that you can make a erasure mark and it's a very clear light mark, and light enough that you can make a compressed charcoal mark and it's a very clear dark mark. So you want it to be right in the middle. And you're just gonna smear corner to corner all over the paper. And if you feel like you need a little more, you see how even this word I wrote on here, which I don't recommend you do, is kind of disappearing into this middle tone. And if we need to get a little darker, you know, we can bring a little more in. Now, my situation here making this video is such that I'm gonna make a separate video for you where I set up something so you can kind of see what I'm hoping you'll be looking at when you make the drawing. But I can't actually look at it while I'm making my drawing here because of the kind of home video arrangement I've got. So I'm gonna have to just invent. So again, you want your test, is this right? If you make a nice mark with the eraser, shows up, good. You make a mark with the compressed charcoal, shows up, good. Now, you're gonna find this is a really forgiving way of drawing because if you make marks you don't like, you can kind of just rub them down into this gray middle tone. All right, so I'm gonna have to just invent something as I was doing a minute ago with the light logic drawing because I don't have the option of really drawing from observation where I'm sitting right now. So what you wanna not do so much is draw the outside of a form to begin with. You wanna really try and observe light and dark. So if I'm imagining I've got a sort of cylinder here, maybe this side is gonna be that dark shadow shape. And maybe I'm gonna have a cast shadow that's happening over here. And maybe I'm looking for the highlight shape, and maybe the highlight is gonna be the tabletop. In a lot of these situations, depending on how you're controlling the light, the tabletop is gonna be your big highlight shape that you erase out of the drawing. So you realize you're using the eraser as a drawing tool. And you are gonna outline highlight shapes and shadow shapes probably in the course of this, but really try and think about this as if you are not drawing with line at all. You're really trying to find these big shapes. So again, you see how this gets dirty. I've got a nice little room here, but you know, you may have to find other means to kind of clean up as you go. So again, this can get kind of dirty. If you find, so you're only drawing with 3 tones. You're deciding anything that's X level of darkness and darker goes to be solid black, right? So the black is 1 tone. Anything that is X level of lightness or lighter, we're gonna call that a highlight. And that's gonna go solid white. Now, when I say solid white, you're not gonna have, you're never gonna get all the way back to the white of the paper. That's fine. Notice here, if you've got a dark shape next to another dark shape, or a highlight shape next to another highlight shape, don't draw a line that shows where one ends and the other begins. Instead, just let them blur right into each other, okay? And you're gonna have to decide the background. Is the background a highlight? Is the background a deep shadow? Is the background a middle tone? The middle tones are the easiest because you've already drawn it by laying down that gray. So I hope this little illustration, which is not nearly as persuasive and nice as what you're going to do when you're drawing from direct observation. I hope it's enough to kind of show you the basics of this technique, and I will look forward to seeing what you're able to do with the homemade setup. And I'm going to give you another video immediately after this one that makes some suggestions about ways that you can make a nice setup at home so that you can have a good group of small objects with clear lighting that will really benefit from this approach.